Let me share a little bit about Nikola. Nikola is an ecological farmer with over 10 years experience working in small scale organic, regenerative, and permaculture systems. With an undergraduate degree in political science, Nikola has long been drawn to questions around establishing local and resilient food and medicine systems. Tending to the land in a way that is life-affirming is a central focus of her work, and Nikola continues to explore the ways in which whole systems healing can be activated at a community level. Nikola began mentoring under folk herbalists about 8 years ago while living in a rural area in the interior of BC. And in 2016, she became certified as a community herbalist through Pacific Rim College. Soon after, she started her own small medicinal herb farm, Half-moon Herbals, and has been growing for her local community since then. Last year, she moved Half-moon Herbals to the traditional territory of the neutral Anishnaabek and Haudenosaunee and Mississauga peoples in southern Ontario, where she continues to farm in collaboration and cooperation with other ecological farmers. So she provides fresh bulk herbs to medicine makers and runs this annual herbal community supported agriculture program where she grows and prepares herbs for her farm members while supporting their learning process through do-it-yourself projects, hands-on experiences, and farm tours. And so in the fall and winter, Nikola offers mentorship programs to gardeners interested in developing herbal growing and people who are seeking to support or start or expand their own medicine garden. Nikola is currently studying as a clinical herbalist while remaining receptive to the continual learning that comes from a connection to the land and to plants themselves. So welcome, Nikola.
Thank you. So yeah, my name's Nikola. My background is I'm Egyptian Arabic through my paternal line, my dad and my whole family that way. And then I am Ukrainian and Irish through my maternal line. So I'm a couple generations now, depending on which side of the family you look at it, settler here. This part of Canada is just incredible. I'm finding it's like coming from being in British Columbia for so long and then out here, what I discovered in arriving here is that this area is the most biodiverse part of all of Canada in terms of the ecosystem, which to me is just incredible, but also it's sort of this heartbreaking thing because you wouldn't know it really, like unless you really like went out and found, and I hope and I assume a lot of you do like to do this, is just like get out into the woods and get out onto the land and actually see who's out there and who we're living with. But it's incredible. The diversity of the plants and the flora and the fauna in this area is so cool. And it's also, I find it just to be a really heartbreaking thing too, to see so much of it struggling to stay healthy and intact. So anyway, my background, I guess, like Jodi said, is I studied political science in university and criminal justice and public policy, and then worked for a few years doing water conservation policy and implementation. And it wasn't until I actually like just visited a couple farms in my early 20s and got my hands into the soil and met some community members and saw some of the systems that were in place that I was like, oh, like, okay, this is a different way of learning that I have not really had much experience with yet and really feel like I need to know. I think a lot of the questions that were raised with all of you are questions that I've asked myself repeatedly and continue to ask myself. And they were ones that when I was in university studying systems, like political science, studying these systems, it was really a question of how did we get here? And I think it's really important to answer those questions or start to think about that. Like, how did we get to this place? And then the next step that I feel like is an important place to go is not necessarily like needing to answer all of those questions or having answers to them, but remaining with the questions themselves and finding a way to connect so that we can begin to envision a place of like, well, where do we want to go from here? And so the question I guess I have that maybe we can all hold in this call is there's something that I really get really passionate about trying to work through this question. And the question is, where does our health as humans and the health of the land intersect? So if it's like our health and like where it could be like a Venn diagram, like where is that intersection point, right? And so just thinking about that is something that I've spent a lot of time doing, and has been part of why I've gotten into the work that I've done, and kind of my journey through farming, working with the land. I've spent a lot of time working under other farmers. I was seed saving for many years, learning how to grow and keep and share heritage seeds, and then learning about the food systems and food production, in like market gardening, family farming models, and then learning about it more in a permaculture perspective, and going from a place of can we reduce our harm on the environment and like limit our impact and try to like stay within a small footprint. And also, can our footprints be actually of benefit to the land? Is it possible for us to live in a way where how we show up and what we do and how we interact with our lives actually has a positive impact on the land? And so that's been like a big thing that I've explored in my work and really like to discuss and talk about. But yeah, so how does our health as humans intersect with the health of the land? So when I think about that question, I think about myself individually in terms of my own personal health. And then I also think of health in this collective way of like our health, community resilience. How do we stay healthy? And when I think about that question, I think about, well, what are our needs? What do we actually need to stay healthy and well? And how are our needs being met? How are we actually supplying our needs? And there's a big conversation, I think, there, because there's a conversation around distinguishing between our wants and our needs. And that is really something to navigate and is different for everybody, I think. But the wants, helping keep us healthy and happy, but what are our needs? Like, what do we actually need for that to take place? And paring it down and getting to like the real root of it is the way that I like to look at it. And then just the question of what is health. So we're talking about like, how does our health as humans interact with the health of the land? What is health? What does that look like? So I know personally, I look at it from a holistic perspective. So I think of health as a body, mind, and spirit connection. We need to have all of those things in order to actually be healthy. And we need to be able to express and have not just each of them individually, but all of them together in order to stay healthy. And so that's where I've kind of come to connecting with herbal medicine. And so, yeah, herbal medicine, just to kind of dive into it and as I know it, and again, feel free to share. I don't know any of your backgrounds or what you're bringing, and I honor that you probably have a lot to offer, so feel free to share. But herbal medicine from a local context, from what I've observed kind of culturally within Southern Ontario, herbal medicine is still a little bit of a fringe thing. I'd say it's like something that is sort of like, maybe over there. And that's not the context in other parts of the world. Like if you look at the UK, for example, medical herbalists are registered and qualified in the same way that MDs are. And they're able to write blood tests or order blood tests and operate in hospital settings. And it's like a much more understood system of medicine. South Africa, it's the same way. And then other parts of the world is much more traditional. If you look at if you go to Ireland, for example, it's really rooted in the traditions and the folk medicine. If you look at Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Chinese medicine, these are long standing histories of using herbal medicine. And so, yeah, within the local context, it's interesting to see in Canada, herbal medicine kind of coming back into the fore and people seeing it and bringing it back into an accepted way of being and integrating it into our lives a little bit more. And that's how I definitely see herbal medicine showing up. There's this really big spectrum of care that I see. And so when we're looking at herbal medicine within the spectrum of care for ourselves, we kind of have like the moment of being like really, really peak healthy to, oh, maybe there's like something going on, like we're starting to feel a little bit off in our lives, like our, even like our perspectives, or we're starting to have like really troubled or dysregulated thinking or thought patterns or emotional patterns or disconnect spiritually from the land and the people around us, or we're starting to have like gut dysbiosis. There's something going on that's starting to feel off. And there's this huge spectrum there of wellness and taking care of ourselves before we get to crisis management. And our current allopathic medical system is really good at the crisis management. It's really good at dealing with like, okay, you have like, you need a surgery or you need a bone set and we are in a crisis situation, we need to deal with it. But there's this huge spectrum here that herbal medicine is part of with other healing modalities in keeping us well. And so we look at that and we're like, oh, okay, how do we regulate blood sugar, for example, so that we don't actually end up with diabetes? How do we start to work with our metabolic conditions so that we don't have and develop fatty, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or deal with and take care of our like minor infections as they come up, so a UTI doesn't travel up into the kidneys, or that a lung infection that just starts out as like a bit of a damp cough doesn't develop into pneumonia because there's no realm of care in there. So herbal medicine really steps into that place and says, how do we take care of ourselves within this spectrum? And there's a lot of different layers of care in that. There's a lot of really advanced clinical herbalists who are working alongside people going through chemotherapy or things like that, that are just moving and blending these care models together to have the best support for people. And then there's also a real invitation more and more and more, I think, for what a lot of people say is just what would it be like if we had an herbalist in every home? If all of us kind of had this basic level of proficiency of knowing how to take care of ourselves and those around us in these types of kind of common ways. And a lot of us have that knowledge. A lot of us have that within us. It like comes from our lineage. A lot of us have like, a cup of mint tea after dinner if we're having like a bit of stomach upset, or like chamomile tea before bed or something like that. Garlic in our foods, a lot of traditional foods, those combinations are good medicine for us. And so there is, in that invitation for having an herbalist in every home, we have the remembrance of herbal medicine as the people's medicine. And so it is like a big reclaiming process of ourselves and our health. It is a reintegration of ourselves in connection to who we are through connecting to our traditional ways of being. And it also is an opportunity to integrate and weave together these traditions that come from our lineages and that we meet and can connect to with the science of how we're understanding things now, and bringing those together and understanding ourselves and operating in that joint connective way. Even more. So it's an opportunity to connect to ourselves. And another reason why I think herbal medicine is why I get so like passionate about it is because when you have an herbalist in every home, you have this opportunity for somebody, whoever's feeling called, to also have a really strong connection to the land. Because in order to work effectively to take care of that damp cough that's kind of starting to develop into a lung infection, you need to know which plants to use and how to use them. And there is sort of a commodification aspect to it where, you can go to a health food store and buy a capsule of an herb, or you can order your herb online and have it shipped to you and you open it from the bag and you start using it that way. But there also is an opportunity to actually go out onto the land and be like, well, who is this plant? Who are you? And And that's how I see showing up as a community herbalist or as an herbalist within a folk way, is to start to assess, and this is how I operate as a community herbalist. I'm constantly kind of looking out and assessing for the health of the people who are closest to me. And I think, you know, some of the questions that were tabled before of like, how do we start to approach some of these really big topics? I think we really just have to like come back. Part of that is coming back into our realms, our spheres of influence, right? And so I think about it like, okay, what are the needs of the people around me? You know, like is there somebody like autoimmune type of conditions or like excessive allergies, or somebody, you know, like postpartum or end of life, or like, where are we? What are our needs? And I'm constantly trying to assess the needs of my community and be prepared and be ready and be learning of how to address those needs. And in that same way, in calling on the plants to help us in that way, I'm also assessing the land then, because when we start to connect to who is this plant, it is like, well, what does this plant need to grow? Who is this plant? This is the lavender plant. It really likes sandy soil. In order to develop the phytochemicals necessary to get the volatile oils that actually offer its medicine, it needs really sandy soil. It needs a lot of sun. You know, which ones like the wet, like to have their feet wet, which ones grow in the understory, which ones grow like open in the prairies. And so we're not just assessing the environment in terms of our community health, we're assessing the landscape and the land and the health of the land as well. And we are bringing those two things together with herbal medicine. So that brings up like a big question of how are the herbs coming to us? How are the herbs grown? And that's where I get really passionate about. Again, I have like a small scale farm, and so I'm constantly thinking of how can I grow these medicinals and supply them to my community, but how can I grow them in a way that is actually giving back to the land too? And that's where regenerative farming is so incredible. The aspects of it where we're having the benefits of regenerative farming, where it's like locking and storing carbon from the atmosphere into the soil. We are increasing biodiversity of the land. We are increasing soil health. We're making a space for the non-human peoples as well to live and be in a healthy way with us. And so that aspect of regenerative farming, how do we grow these plants and work with these plants in a way that helps the land as well, is where I see a little bit more of that question being answered of how does our health as humans and the health of the land really intersect? And when we come down to it, I think it really starts to become more and more obvious of how much those are the same thing. And as herbalists working in a herbal community, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the Canadian Herb Conference. A lot of the conversations coming up in these spaces are, we as herbalists have a responsibility to be supporting our land defenders and our water defenders and the land itself, because we understand, and it's so easy with herbal medicines to appreciate this intimacy of interaction. We understand that the land is so necessary. The health of the land is absolutely necessary for our health as humans. And so taking care of the land is us taking care of our own health. And it is also, you know, there's like an element of like, oh, that's like heavy, but there's also an element of like, wow, that's just like an expression of gratitude. That's like, thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for meeting my needs. Thank you for making me healthy. How do I take care of you in return so you can take care of me? And it just kind of feeds itself like that. And so I see like a lot of the big questions, again, just there's such great questions that were tabled. And, you know, one of the last ones that got sent through was like, well, how do you keep having the energy to do what you're doing? And it's just like, oh, look, it's all about these relationships, and the relationships are just like feeding each other. And we can step more into a place of falling in love with our relationships to each other and our relationships to all those who take care of us, and then find ways to show up. Like there's so many different ways to do this, but actually showing up in a way that we feel inspired by and called by, and can see like, okay, this is something that I see. I understanding more of how we got here. And now I'm like looking and being like, how do I see health? How do I see a healthy, happy life for myself and future for myself? And then from that vision, begin to just like start being inspired in the ways that are unique to us to make that happen. And I just see that as being a really like joyful thing. So it doesn't feel like a weight. It doesn't feel like a trial. And it's it's helped me really remember I've definitely fallen into the depths of, like eco grief and despair about the state of the world for sure. So realigning and getting into the place of how do we take care of each other, and how do we just like love and support each other from this place of gratitude has really been a helpful thing for me. So
I just wanted to make a comment. Something you had said that really resonated with me was that about the footprints, and it's an old saying, leave only footprints. But you said, maybe we can be making it better with our footprints. Maybe there's a positive that we can do with it. And it reminded me of being in Scouts, because when we went to a site or anywhere outside, we left it better than we found it. So we picked up other people's garbage. We cleaned up the campsites and things better than we left them. And then I was thinking about how what you were saying with the knowledge holders in each home, and that our grandparents used to provide us with that extra aged generation of wisdom that we could just say, yeah, I trust you. I don't need to see a book. You've got the answer. You're going to help me get better. And, sort of monitoring along the way. And I was thinking about our lifestyles, how we've now moved away from home. Our families are more disconnected. And I was thinking about how you can fill that role in some sense in your small farm, being able to provide these options and alternatives and enlighten the communities that are disconnected from their generation that gives them that wisdom to find another source of this same thing. Because we're getting to a point where we're going to lose those knowledge holders and that information is gone. And so I think what you're doing is really important to help bring back and revitalize the idea of food and herbs as a medicine and how to apply them. And then, you were saying that culturally they were just sort of built in, putting garlic and these sorts of things in your food. And so I think it's about going back to those, and then what resonates with you individually, so that way, it connects to you a little bit better, and maybe it's the right recipe for you. So I just really liked the regenerative idea of maybe we put better footprints out there, and that, that we need to start trusting these networks, or finding them and finding out how they can somehow be placed into our home like our grandparent was, in that trusting sense that they have a innate knowledge that there's nothing to really question too much. And that, because sometimes it's like, oh, well, did they get better from this, or was it this, is it science, is it, herbs? And then, but really they've been doing it for so long, why can't we just trust in tradition and those sorts of things? So I think, yeah, I really like what you've been saying, and I like the idea. The resonating of leave better footprints is new to me, and I like it. And it like, there was thinking, what other cultural aspects of people influence this as well? Like, I was thinking about my scouting experience, but what other cultural, we learned about the Sikh population. I came from a Jewish family where, I learned that food kept you apart from people. You don't go dine at other people's homes because, they're not kosher. So whereas the Sikh population is like, Sunday, everybody come, I want to feed you. It has nothing to do with religion. And so they're using food in a new way to provide a public service and a connection. And so, yeah, I was just curious as to where can we find all these other connections and tap into them and let them grow, so that things can move a little faster with existing networks.
I think I'll just say that, yeah, that's so true. I really like hearing that feedback. And I've been told too, in terms of the footprints, trying to be conscious of leaving footprints worth inheriting. And so like that being really the key. And it wasn't until like farming and trying, even when I was farming, it was all about like minimizing impact, minimizing like, don't use the chemicals, don't till the land, minimize the impact. But then also, when I started to discover things like and learn about things like permaculture, which is more of an indigenous way of connecting and tending the land, and then understanding there's certain plants that actually respond better with human tending and connection. And what else within our ecosystems have we actually co-evolved with, so that we can step back into those ways of being that are actually taking care of the things that we've co-evolved with, like our foods and our medicines and the fish in the streams and the waterways and all these sorts of things. And yeah, there's so many layers to it all in terms of health and like the community aspect, and how it all ripples out is a really beautiful part of that too. I see that as well.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jodi. So Jodi is a PhD student working with me, and she's a doctoral fellow with the funding from the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. She works on food systems governance in Canada's settler-colonial context. Her research partners are the traditional ecological knowledge elders group in the Robinson-Huron Treaty, which kind of north of Manitoulin, I guess. And she seeks to characterize the impacts of forestry practices on treaty rights and Anishnaabek food systems. So her dissertation research. This research involves Indigenous environmental governance, food democracy, and forestry policy. And she may touch on issues of like glyphosate, which I had no idea that glyphosate, or as a herbicide was being used not just on agricultural lands, but on areas that have been reforested, and that's really causing havoc for animal populations and ecosystems, and then the humans that rely on those country foods. So maybe she'll share a bit more about that later. So her research, her master's research, which she also did here at the University of Waterloo, investigated the sustainability of Canada's pulses sector, so lentils and beans and peas and so on. And she's also been mentored by Dr. Vandana Shiva. If you don't know who she is, look her up. She's really incredible, based in India, and did all kinds of work on seed sovereignty and kind of, reconnecting with the land, written a lot of books and is an incredible speaker. Jodi was also mentored by the late Kathleen Neen, who was very involved in the founding of Food Secure Canada. And complementing her studies, Jodi continues lifelong climate action and offers peer-to-peer and mentorship supports while being here at UW. She's a public intellectual and a committed community educator, and has been for decades prior to engaging in her master's and PhD work. She was a co-founder of the Dangerous Ideas Festival and the Praxis Project Permaculture-Inspired Art Festival in New Brunswick, and the Global Seed Freedom Campaign. She was also a member of the Organic Value Chain Roundtable and was a key figure in developing and promoting the organic sector's campaign called Think Before You Eat. And also, given her human rights work in food systems, she was awarded an Oak Fellowship for the study of human rights down in the US at Colby College for, I think, half a year in 2015. So, welcome, Jodi.
I'm going to apologize in advance for my audio. My head jack broke on my 2015 Apple, and so you're going to get a bit of feedback, and I'm going to encourage you to indulge me, and I will try to speak slowly. So when I'm listening to the portion of Nikola's excellent presentation that I was able to catch, and looking at the questions again that Stephanie's put before me that the group of you had pulled together, I'm noticing, as I would as a systems thinker, a bunch of overlap and interconnections to what's being asked. And so one of the things that my scholarship has taught me as a skill in sort of socio-ecological system spaces is to really look at a question and ask what's actually being asked. And so when I read things like dilemmas of greenwashing and capitalism, the need for consumer education and action, supportive policies and legislations, why is that all hard to implement? Where does the region stand? what kind of cultural shift is required. These are all they're different ways to ask the same question, in my view. And so also, as a person who is using a particularly shaped political ecology lens, there will be a way that I relate to these questions from a place of centering power dynamics over individuated choices. And so I scan through, and it's hard to tell because some of you have pictures and some of you don't, and I'm a terrible guess of age, but I'm going to guess that by and large, everyone on this call, save Steffanie and myself, have grown up in an entirely neoliberal era, so that your awareness of value, of how economies work, of what's possible, was all shaped after 1980. And so there is a flavor to what is the hegemonic or sort of overarching take on what is the purpose of being here, and how do we assign value in society, and what are we willing to tolerate for some envisioned liberal fantasy that isn't the world that we live in. And so you folks are also coming at a time that I would describe as late stage neoliberal colonial capitalism, when a lot of the things that previous generations could continue to buy into and believe have been laid bare as illusions, and you grew up with those as illusions for yourself. And so when I look at these questions and I think about how those questions were answered for me when I was your age, asking them in the 90s, it's stunning how I can't, even with a straight face, provide the same kinds of answers that I might have in the past, which might be like, we're just going to line up behind those SDGs and it'll all be fine. Or like, we're going to partner through with all the corporations to find a way to educate the consumer and use good money to, or use bad money to do good things. And it's like a bunch of things that I might have said in the past as ways of engaging that were believed by the people who told them to me to be legitimate means to engage. All of that stuff is out the window. And so rather than engaging in a tactical conversation with you, I have a few short minutes to inspire you, I think, to really look deeply at underlying assumptions and start to really have deeper ontological and epistemological discussions with yourselves, which are $10 words for how do I know what I know and why do I believe what I believe. And so when you put that in the context of Nikola's conversation, where just our relationship as earth beings, as part of the ecological family and not stewards dominant over it, that we get from a very warped Judeo-Christian capitalist approach to land and people. Know that we are here in Canada on the basis of terra nullius and a doctrine of discovery by which a number of people across Europe agreed if folks didn't have a church and buildings and didn't, have polluting industry, they couldn't be considered a real civilization. You were free to take that land as if nobody was already there because they're no better than flora and fauna, as opposed to looking at ancient cities that had found a way to live not without dispute and not in some kind of illusory, noblesse oblige idea of what it was pre-contact, but we can just look at the records we're being able to find of city after city that's buried underground, records being destroyed from the 1500s and 1600s that showed that there were civilizations equally, if not more advanced technologically, all across North America before Europeans came with our small-mindedness in which we enclose the commons, we reduce everything to financial value, and we have a warlike 1,000-year history of imposing a worldview of a God that sits on a cloud on top of everyone. And this is not a critique of anybody's Christianity here. When I speak of this, I'm speaking of the political dynamic of Christian colonialism. If you want to get a deeper dive into that, I encourage people to look at Jared Yates Sexton. He's an American who was raised in an evangelical context and has a very incredible analysis of sort of the whole North American project as Christo white supremacy. And so with that awareness, if you ran around talking to people like I'm talking to you right now, if you went home and said, hey, Mom, I understand the problem is that we're in a Christo-fascist dystopia and we all need to abandon capitalism, probably are not going to get very far. And so I listen to Desmond Cole, who says, sharing is caring. So what are the relationships? You know, we can analyze it, and it's good for us as academics to look at the where and why, but like what is missing in our way of relating to the world is that it is transactional and it is not relational. And so a good introductory piece to this kind of thinking is Vandana Shiva's book, Monocultures of the Mind, where she deals with the colonial institutions putting forestry where forestry is. And, you know, we have mining is over here and health is over here, compartmentalized bits and pieces of a colonial economy, as opposed to, you know, Anishnaabek economies that would have been integrated, where you can't separate out you know, the 7 grandmother-grandfather teachings from you know, this year's hunting decisions, from how we're going to negotiate with those folks who keep coming up here if something's going on, you know. So like governance in our dominant sort of liberal democratic world is transactional. It's not relational. And I think that if we can get society broadly to shift normatively from, you know, I mean, were you kids growing up with, you're a brand and you have to figure out how to brand yourself, and like, what's your voice going to be? And this very kind of transactional approach, as opposed to what gifts do I have to give at this time to my community, and in what ways can I be in service of our fundamental responsibility to ensure the continuation of life. Now, not everybody's going to agree that that's our fundamental shared you know, some people are like, we're here for a good time, not a long time. When you die, you're done, and I'm going to get what I can, and I owe nothing to the future. So let's look at that and call it what it is. It's a kind of eco-fascism, eco-modernism. You know, as long as we're okay, we don't care what happens to someone somewhere else. And we should be talking about that. And I'm not here to say that, you know, one way is right or wrong, but as a person raised in compassion, I have to believe that, you know, somebody else thought to be generous enough to make choices such that I could be here with the gifts that were presented to me in life. And it feels kind of like, you know, an unexamined commodification, transactional existence forgets that with rights are also responsibilities. And it's one of the reasons Indigenous people around the globe so vociferously reject the framing of human rights, even though we may have to see activities where Indigenous struggle plays along with human rights framing, but it sits inside still of an authoritarian worldview in which someone or somebody is there that grants or oversees the rights, and they're not just inherent. And so some of the, you know, and rights being something that I have access to without delineating what the conferring responsibilities are. So when Nikola goes and leaves Sema when she takes plants, it's not because she's having a superstitious moment, but because she's making an offering, recognizing that a lot of energy went into growing some tobacco or sage, that there was a lot of all of the relatives, the sun, the water, the soils, the soil microbes, different animals were engaged in making that happen. And collectively, we offer this thing when we take something, causes someone to remember the relationships that they're being in. And so that, you know, moving away from transactionality and the centering of the individual experience at the expense of the capacity for life to continue is the bit and piece. And anything short of that, we're going to just be tinkering at the edges, in my view. And so, you know, dilemmas of greenwashing and capitalism, they arise out of this unwillingness to examine like what's being preserved. When we say, you know, we want to do everything but do it green, it's like maybe we shouldn't be doing everything that we're doing. You know, the notion that we can continue to consume, but just swap out, you know, it's called substitution. And so in agriculture, it's input substitution. I'm going to use an organic pesticide instead of a conventional pesticide, and I'm going to kill the water and the oil slower, as opposed to, as Nikola suggests, taking a regenerative approach and asking, how am I here as a partner in soil building for future capacity? And how am I operating in a way that I never take more than what I can put back or enhance in a given season? Otherwise, I'm strip mining the soil. And organic sector that I love and support, and people are doing the best they can in a capitalist system, still often ends up mining the soil just slower and more kindly. But it still leads to the same spot when we're not thinking regeneratively and perennially. I'm going to wrap up in a moment here. I just wanted to, the inevitable. So where's Waterloo, compared to other urban areas? The first thing that comes to mind is having Winona LaDuke look me square in the eyes and very sternly say, wherever you are is the spot that you're responsible for making the place that's no longer the polluting, disastrous colonial nightmare that it is. And so that's the place. And it's really not your concern if it is as much or more than somewhere else is doing. And when you're able to be on top of doing that in your neighborhood, absolutely come help me. But, physically being on my land or somewhere else to fix some bigger spot, or, having to focus on China because it's, used more carbon budget in the last 10 years than all of Europe since the 1750s or whatever numbers are flying around. We support and educate each other so that Chinese folks where they are can stop and do what they're doing, like Zhen Zhangxi is, like others in our circle are doing, to fix where they're from, and we fix where we're from. So with that kind of aside, where we're at as a region is we're sitting on some of the best farmland left in southwestern Ontario. We have a country line that is under threat at all times, but has managed to make it so that we have the second highest agricultural receipts in the entire province of Ontario. We have a educated and engaged workforce, and we have versions of socialist backgrounds that hide out inside of libertarian movements like the Mennonite Central Committee and other such places. We are the people who did the blue box before everyone else, and before we realized that we were being duped by the by the food and beverage sector into taking over one of their responsibilities, but we thought we were on a right path. And so what we've seen is, unlike other regions who are caught in the same neoliberal colonial nightmare, we've seen a capacity to do and be innovative, and that we have the water and the land base to do something about some of the things other folks can't. And so if you're thinking that your goal is to stay in an urban area and not listen to some of my elders who say, get out. Waterloo Region is an incredible region to be engaging in. And we're seeing, we got Mike Morris elected. He is standing up and speaking out on the Wet'suwet'en situation. He's already brought 2 petitions before Parliament that would be considered eco-socialist in their construction. And we have the ability to move people. We're also, conversely, a very conservative community when it comes to where money and power lies, as you can see by the ongoing struggles with Reallocate Waterloo Region and police services, our attacks on unhoused people that just took place over the last week. If folks didn't see, we bulldozed some unsheltered folks' belongings because, the Rolling Stones thing's about to open and we can't have people sleeping on the edge of where, they got to go for dinner to keep our economy rolling. So there's no place better than others. It's like, where are you going to put your energy? And that's where the best place is. So I'm going to open it up to questions or comments if folks have any.
Yeah, I'm just really grateful, Jodi. Thank you for the reframe, and how eloquently and just well you just are able to say all of that and speak to all of it. It's a really big thing to look at the entire structure and systems that we live in and be like, instead of trying to answer and spin our wheels within the system of how we're going to fix ourselves by getting out of this system, how do we actually back up and zoom out the lens and be like, this is actually maybe how we want to be looking at it in terms of reorienting ourselves and moving forward. So I really appreciate that. I always really appreciate hearing from you. And I'm always really curious too of the what next steps that you see, because you have such a really good finger on the pulse of what's happening and a continuous way, locally and globally. So I'm always kind of all right, what do you see? What kind of trends? Where do you see us going? So
yeah, one of the things that I'm seeing really start to pick up, and it's probably because it's what I surround myself in, and I'm comfortable if it's a 0.3% of the movement, I'm down. Where my energy is moving right now is 100% behind land back. We have the last generation of Indigenous folks who are going to be able to make claims based on treaty that won't have been watered down, sold out, or otherwise ransom economied away. And there's a massive pressure for modernization of treaties, which undermine inherent Aboriginal title and rights. And so land occupations over the next 6 months to 2 years, I think, are going to need to really explode. Any trust fund babies out there, folks who are comfortable living in poverty out of their car, who can fundraise and get after their own food, they're asking for people out on the CGL line right now. They want people at the TMX line in the Secwepemc territory right now. The Mi'kmaq have been last 3 summers stopping glyphosate aerial spraying in their forests right now. Robinson Huron Treaty this summer is going to need people in their forests to do that. The Neskatanga are not permitting any mining, and there was just 8 more leases allowed on their lands. They're going to need people on the land. They are 2% of the population, 2.8% of the population, or 5% of the population for folks that are connected to reserve at this stage of the game. And they're going to need collaborators and allies to stand up when folks are called. And I feel like if folks like me had the answers, we'd already be in a solution mode, right? Like my generation didn't figure it out. That doesn't mean, oh, you young ones, it's on you. What it means is stop looking at middle-aged white ladies for solutions, and let's look at Indigenous Climate Action Network and find out what those folks are having to say about what needs to happen. Or what is Yellowhead Institute suggest we do? Or what does Russ Diabo call on us to do with his coalitions? What is the NDN collective asking that we step up to and do? And so for me, if I'm looking for climate solutions and it isn't Indigenous, Black, or a person of color, racialized people led, if it isn't, colonized world, I don't like third world, if it isn't the colonized world's response and leadership, I'm probably in the wrong room. If it's got a white dude in front of it and they're not passing a mic on a regular basis, like I could get mad at Bill McKibben, but dude passes the mic, and I see him less and less because he's doing more and more work to make sure that we hear from Clayton Thomas Muller or that we hear from Melina Massimo Labucan, right? So for me, it's like, some of it is faith-based. Do you believe in a world that doesn't rely on the depth of technology we're into in order to have a meaningful and good life? And what does one's own sort of decarbonization, and I think the focus on carbon, I'm not even going to use that word again. It's because we can measure it. It's really the least of our worries right now is freaking carbon. But the idea that, what can I do to simplify my lifestyle and be more regenerative and less consumptive? There's a big need to just go learn skills. I didn't learn the skills that Nikola is learning. I played at it, but then I was in too big of a hurry and I had to be a policy wonk and go save everything. And if I'd spent the time from when I started to focus till now that Nikola has spent, I'd be proficient and expert, not just in herbology, but also as a midwife. As a side gig, because we need people in the community who can deliver babies and know about medicines. But, I got myself too wrapped up and we don't have time. So take your time on the long-term skills is another piece to the solution, because it's going to be people who have relationships with the land and these plants and each other. We're going to be able to provide right guidance, not folks who can theorize about it or can see that it's a good idea, but don't have direct live experience. So, doing slow things, reskilling, making sure you're participating in gardening. It's okay if a project lasts 2 years. It doesn't have to be forever. But just the practice of doing things collectively with each other is going to help us figure out what are the next pieces. I'm also really hopeful and excited about some of the sort of like really low-key technologies that are starting to come to fruition, and they come out of that sort of permaculture type thinking, that sort of systems thinking or feedstock thinking. And I don't mean circular economy. I mean like really stopping and considering, if I use this versus that, what else does it do? And some of those answers, I think, are in people's heads right now, and we don't have them, and we have to have faith that they're going to come out if we create, as Yonka Porta asks us to do, to create the conditions for the emergence of the world that we want, and don't try to operate it and plan it, because you can't plan a global life support systems. But what you can do is notice that where there's, complex watersheds, we tend to have better air and more life and clean water. So we probably want to encourage those kinds of spaces. So figuring, if we can really focus on what actions are going to create the emergence of what we want, rather than trying to negotiate with or fight the system that is controlling and taking us all down right now. It doesn't mean not be aware or engaged, but another tactic, which is to create the conditions around that for the emergence of something else.
How do we get people involved in the land or food in a way that's like kind of feeding that part that's going to kind of sustain the inspiration to keep heading in that direction?
I'll jump on that first, Nikola, and then you can jump in. Absolutely, group work helps with that. It's interesting because when we start working in community groups or collectives, depending on what everybody's bringing to the table and the level of structure that's there, you can sometimes become sidetracked in the interpersonality, and it's hard. Group work is hard. There's no ideal. A bunch of people think the same way, and we're going to all show up, and it's going to be awesome. And so, when you do start to involve yourself, whether it's with something like the Food Systems Roundtable or, the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank or a Food Not Bombs project of some sort or a community garden, you got to deal with the people who are there, right? And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is, what's the mandate of the group that we have, and what's the skill set and availability of the people who are showing up right now, and set one's expectations relative to what's on hand. It can help reduce some of the disappointment. I think learn to build friendships with people who you don't agree with and you have nothing really in common with, except that you might have some overlap in a group. I was one of Canada's first industrial hemp licensees, and I was part of a co-op. It was the 90s, and I know now, but I was white girl with the dreads and the bare feet and little kids running around, and we had an ex-RCMP officer who ran the green team that busted all the pot growing hippies. We were in a co-op together to try to get industrial hemp, and his reason was to kill the pot industry, and my reason was to save trees. But we were able to work together, and we did that for 2 years before the group fell apart, right? And it was a real big lesson for me that you don't always get to pick your allies, collaborators, and co-conspirators. And so whoever is showing up is who's there. And so being practiced at having those kinds of relationships and friendships throughout, so that when we get to a crisis moment, we're already ready to deal with it. A group that could use some young blood while you folks are studying is the Council of Canadians. We have a Waterloo chapter for the Council of Canadians. It's a great, it's kind of like Toastmasters for activism as far as I'm concerned. It helps you understand civic organization. It's been going for 40 years now, or 35 years anyway, maybe longer. Started by Maud Barlow and friends as a lobby group for civic engagement, and they deal across a bunch of different issues. Brett Patterson kind of runs the show right now, and it's a phenomenal organization, and it's like every single person in that room is silver-haired, and they need you. So it's a great way to practice at that. I kind of checked out of conventional society at about 2021 and have made my life, I run with artists, freaks, back to the land type people, old hippies, Indigenous folks. And it's easier for me to surround myself with people who care passionately. It makes it hard to have family Christmas. So I don't think a full checkout is necessarily needed or a wise situation at this point in time, because your ally might be I have a cousin who's a right-winger, he went to Afghanistan for the army, and he is pushing a massively socialist agenda at his school on Tyendinaga, because we've engaged for the last 4 or 5 years and we've expanded each other's politics. So, you'll be surprised that some of your allies might be someone who's just afraid to verbalize some of the things that you're on. I also encourage IRL. It feels like we're doing a lot of stuff because we're moving things around digitally, but if you have to engage in real life. So, if you're not part of the Fridays for Future group or the UW, the fossil fuel free UW, you know, there's these organizations, you might only meet folks once a month, but it reminds you that other people care, and it's how movements are built. Divest Waterloo is another group who they kind of have folded in a little bit with Fossil Free UW, but there's both of those efforts. And then there's still the PIRGs. Well, we have them, you know, utilize your time and don't worry about if it lasts forever. This is like, you guys are kind of not only practicing academics, but you're practicing civic beings, you know, and you have an opportunity while in university to engage with some of these groups who are doing work that you care about. And it doesn't matter if it's going to save the world, it's practice at how do we be together. The last thing I'm going to say is find a school that's a land-based school that you're interested in. It could be someone who's giving workshops. It can be, you know, just a one-off plant identification, how to identify trees, and start to gift yourself a little one thing here or there. If money is a problem, often most of these folks will make arrangements with you. You might be able to offer to do a write-up for them or something in exchange to get discounts if money is an issue, but there's all kinds of stuff. And I'll work on a list with Steffanie and Nikola before you folks are done your school year so that we can give you a kickstart on what some of those options are that we're aware of.
Just to say for myself, I found mentorship were really important, of finding the people who are older than I am, doing the things that I feel really passionate about, or that are like already blazing the trail. We don't all have to be trying to find like our own trail through, you know, beating the bush back. We can actually kind of like follow and create paths, and also in that widening of those paths, create space for other people coming behind us. So both finding people to mentor from and under and learn from and be inspired by. And I've often found it's most helpful in more of a familial sense, rather than like, again, that moving out of that transaction aspect of like, I'm going to pay you and you're going to give me something. It's like relating and and connection, and actually starting to care about each other. And then the information comes through that way so well, because you're not only getting like a verbal talking to or a demonstration, you're actually getting to see the ways that somebody operates, and all of the like things that we can't talk about, that we just see and feel in those exchanges, that really start to, I don't know, I've found that impact really, really substantial. So both finding a mentor, but then also I've been continually told, keep sharing what you know, like don't hoard things, don't hold on to it. Like we're not, like we've got a tendency, there's definitely a tendency in culture to like mine, and I have to hold on to it. And I have to like, you know, like not share anything. We all need our own. And it's like, no. And so with information too, you know, like learn something, talk about it the next time you meet with your friends, you know, like learn something, like share it, empower each other. So I think that that's, yeah, kind of like part of that way forward. And then just in terms of vision, I've heard it expressed a number of times, and it's something I really think about when I am out on the land, which is the way that I find I always learn the most. When I'm out on the land, actually interacting with real life, I have this vision of like, okay, I want to be able to, and it's come from living in a place where I could walk up to any waterway and dip my cup and drink right out of that stream or that creek or that lake. And that to me is like, this is just like a non-negotiable. This is like a way that life could be, should be, needs to be. And so just orienting in that way of like, yep, this is the way forward, helps like just sift through so much bullshit of the, or, you know, stuff of like the getting lost in it, of like, where am I going? How do I do it? What am I actually trying to accomplish? And it's just like, that's part, you know, setting sort of like things like that for ourselves to be like, yep, that's necessary. That would be really great. That's really important for everybody. So yeah, just encourage that as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really inspired. And I think what I'm taking away is this invitation of this sense of the importance of collectivity, importance of kind of collective, you know, collective action and coming together for a common vision, a common purpose, and that sense of personal engagement. Because I think a lot of what we learn in social science classes at university relates to, okay, government policy and, you know, or private sector businesses. And and that's probably where almost all your energy goes as a co-op student as well. And what I'm trying to bring in my courses is kind of the inspiration and what I've been seeing kind of on the ground in terms of like the third sector, community engagement, and personal practice. I think that's giving me even more nourishment and inspiration in the past few years as well. And so Jodi was speaking in different terms earlier about like holding space for that world that we want to see emerge. So that's really beautiful.
Yeah, a big piece of the work that I'm involved in right now is this notion that we've separated concepts of what in English is called the sacred from the rest of our lives. And I'm not talking about your religion or textbooks, but the notion of sacredness. And Kim Tallbear, you can look up, we've got from the Canadian Society of Ecological Economics. She was a keynote at our event this summer. And she came to us days after the confirmation of the missing graves and was feeling quite disillusioned and wasn't clear where she could speak from about this idea of reclaiming the sacred, in our intellectual work. And what she basically said is, this is another product of colonialism, this notion that there's something that's sacred and there are, spiritual people who are separate from the other people, or that there's these things that we do that are sacred while other things are not, and that the sacredness is in the relationship that you carry with yourself and everything and that you encounter. And so we can either look at those things in a profane way, or we can look at those things in a sacred way, is one of the ways to start thinking about introducing conceptually the notion of a missing sacred in the life. Because as we've seen the byproduct of religion in those missing graves, there's a real reason why we have several generations in this particular part of the world who have rejected formal religion, because we've seen the worst of what it has to bring. And so within your own tradition, whether, whatever that is, and I honor each and every person's right to relate to the sacred in the way that you do. If you are part of a formal religion, this is not a critique of your formal religion. It's an invitation to look at, through your lens, whatever is your tradition, what is it to have a direct relationship with the sacred, what it is to be sacred, and can that be something that is, brought into your everyday? And so I'm going to share a ceremony that was given to me to share with others. You're welcome to do it or not. Set your alarm for 15 minutes before sunrise every day for a year. Take a glass of water, walk out to where the sun is going to rise. It doesn't matter if it's cloudy. Hold your glass to the water and let the rays of that first light enrich the water, and think of that moment. And ask yourself each day, what is sacred about this relationship I'm having with the sun and this water? Just every day. When you say thank you, thanks for the water and thanks for the sun, that doesn't interrupt anybody's religion, to just be grateful the sun is around and to be grateful that we have water that we're able to drink. And see if you can build your own, within your own tradition, a relationship between you, water, and sun as a way of making this sacred real. And that's just an invitation. It comes from Diane Kantakwas Longboat at Soul of the Mother in Six Nations. And that's it.
Beautiful way to end. Thank you all for being here.